West and East stands have very fine Art Deco decoration that ranks with some of the best architecture of the period.
Highbury is a monument to Art Deco. This entrance to the East Stand is known as the Marble Hall. This and the rooms all around have been virtually unchanged for the past 60 years.
It strikes you when you walk into the place that you're coming to somewhere special. The board have structured the place to keep up to the times, but still retained its feel of the 30s, I would say. It still looks like an old stadium, but it's geared to be very, very innovative and very, very modern.
No other club is so imbued with its history. This huge bath has seen the scrubbing down of generations of players.
At one stage it used to be that huge bath, and right next to it there used to be like a cold plunge, and you used to go from one out of one where you're nice and hot into the other, but only the brave ones done that. I didn't take no part in that.
But this is the secret heart of this great football club, the boardroom, a centre of power, politics and sporting passion. If walls could talk, then this room, more than any other, would lay bare a rich and secret history.
They don't play your game, they play the attacking game.
The boardroom is exactly as it was. It's been extended ever so slightly at one end, but the wood panelling is still the original table, and the chairs are exactly on the same design as they were when they first moved here. So if one of our old directors popped back to have a look at the game, he'd feel pretty much at home up there as well.
But could all this reverence for history be standing in the way of Arsenal being a go-ahead modern club?
It's been part of my family since 1919 when my grandfather came on the board. We had a very high-class manager in Herbert Chapman in those days, and presumably an enlightened board, which I hope was my grandfather.
It was that board which took the bold decision in the early 1930s to demolish the previous unmarketable stands and commission a fresh vision of football.
On their site will arise gorgeous new structures fit for the supporters of heroes to live in.
No other football club had taken it all quite so seriously before.
The West Stand was designed by Claude Ferrier, who was actually a specialist in Beaux-Arts classicism. And what's so interesting is he broke out of that framework here and designed something with this very strong 1930s Art Deco feel. And it's the lettering, it's the low relief stucco detailing. It's a very subtle form of architecture that's not what you'd normally expect to find on a football stadium.
If you look on the balcony of the stand there's this wonderful sort of scalloped, almost like a velvet drape across the balcony, which was very much to give the impression you're at a theatre, so that the more middle-class Londoners would regard going to Arsenal as a special occasion.
But now Arsenal wants to expand, but much of the historic framework is in their way.
The problem is the ground can only take 38,000. It's always sold out, leaving thousands of fans disappointed.
We've looked at ways of expanding the number of seats we can have on the existing footprint, and we can increase by a few thousand, but clearly it's going to be costly and difficult. We have 8.5 acres here, and we can't move the stands backwards. We can go upwards a little bit maybe, but it's not going to be easy.
Serious redevelopment plans are already underway.
Now English Heritage, alarmed by rumours of redevelopment, have urged the new government to list without delay. The decision rests with the Minister for National Heritage, Tony Banks. As Minister for both Sport and Listing, he has a big dilemma. If he listens to the club, he must accept their worries that listing could commercially damage Arsenal's future, blocking the creation of vital extra seating.
I think if you're listed, you have to get other permissions before you do anything to the stands. I mean, it's like a house at grade 1 listed or something, that you can't knock part of it down without getting permission, and I think we would be in the same position here.
Would you ever consider leaving here, though?
Well, we have thought about it, but I must say that I would hope not.
And this is the nub of the new minister's dilemma.
Now the club fears listing will go ahead, it's threatening to move out. For Mr. Banks to be remembered as the man who drove Arsenal from its historic home is not the best way for a sports minister to launch his career.
It would be a crying shame if for one reason or another we did have to move from this ground. It would be a terrible thing.
Local supporters are in no doubt what's most important.
I feel it's more important that Arsenal stay here than that these stands are kept necessarily perfectly intact. The important things about football grounds are the people that sit in them, not actually what they look like.
But nor does Mr. Banks, as listing minister, want to be remembered for allowing an architectural treasure to be lost.
I have a great sympathy, but at the same time I feel that Highbury must be saved for the nation if at all possible.
Now Arsenal and English heritage await the minister's decision. A football ground without a club is something of a white elephant. In an age when there's such intense pressure to keep pace with the modern game, the past is catching up with Arsenal. And yet, it is a past beyond compare.
All good bells and jolly the company. All good bells and jolly the company.
Behind this elegant facade in St James's Square, London, sits a forgotten palace with the most royal of connections. For this was the childhood home of Queen Mother. Her schoolroom now lies empty and forlorn, but it's unaltered since she learned her lessons here 90 years ago. This was her family's townhouse, an 18th century masterpiece designed by the great architect Robert Adam. Adam's use of classical detail spawned a host of imitators. What became known as Adam's style was soon the height of elegance and refinement, though his detractors called it Adam's gingerbread and sippets of embroidery. A favourite motif, the ram's head, decorates every fireplace and looks down from every column. Once a future queen peeked through these banisters watching the comings and goings below. But now, despite its immaculate state, the house is shut up and for sale. There are hopes this forgotten piece of royal history could be open to the public sometime in the future. Choosing which stately home to visit is rarely a matter of mere architecture. More often we want to sample the domestic trappings of another age. So when it comes to choosing between visiting ruins and historic houses that are still intact, most of us don't have to think twice. But Dan Cruickshank reveals all is not what it seems.
Sutton Scarsdale Hall in Derbyshire, one of the finest early 18th century Baroque houses in Britain. It was designed in 1724 by Francis Smith for the Earl of Scarsdale. In scale and quality, it rivals its close neighbours, Chatsworth and Hardwicke Hall. This wonderful oak-panelled room was one of a series of reception rooms running the entire length of the ground floor. Here Lord Scarsdale entertained the elite of Derbyshire society during the 1720s and 1730s in front of this fireplace framed by these magnificent Ionic pilasters. Only this room isn't actually in Sutton Scarsdale at all. It's 3,500 miles away in America. Astonishingly, the Museum of Art in Philadelphia is now home to Sutton Scarsdale's rooms. Their removal was part of a dramatic decline in the fortunes of historic houses in the 1920s and 30s. Impoverished owners simply abandoned houses or demolished them. But museums, quick to spot a potential attraction at a time when most country houses were closed to the public, bought up entire rooms complete with timber panelling and plasterwork, the very walls themselves, and put them on display. Throughout Europe and America, there was a passion for period rooms in museums. But that passion is now long dead. Even in America, the Sutton Scarsdale rooms attract little attention. In the meantime, the house from which the rooms were wrenched has become a ruin, a stark shell staring blankly over the Derbyshire dales. This is Sutton Scarsdale Hall today, or what's left of it. The roof was taken down, the panelling, the great staircase of furniture sold off. After that, the house was left to fend for itself. The only reminder of its once spectacular interior are these fragments of stucco ornament which couldn't be levered off the walls. The fate of other historic interiors is even more depressing. No longer top attractions, they languish in museum warehouses, consigned to indefinite storage. Here at the warehouse of London's Victoria and Albert Museum are the remains of one of the most important interiors ever created in this country. Known as the Haynes Grange Room, it is a panelled interior of great beauty and perfection, probably dating from the 1580s, and a pioneering example of classical design in Britain. And these are the elements that made up the fire surround. These wonderfully carved printing columns framed the hearth, the opening. They supported this splendid entablature down there. In turn, that supported these smaller columns, and on top of these sat this pediment. Why should rooms not be reunited with ruins? It would cost money, but so does storing them away unseen. The house from which the Haynes Grange Room was taken survives, hidden away in a remote corner of southern England. The farmer whose family has owned the house for generations agreed to show it to me.
This is the Haynes Grange house.
Although the original half timbering has been rendered over, the structure has remained unaltered since the 16th century. Nowadays the house is derelict, it hasn't been lived in since 1965. This is where the room stood until 1908. The extraordinary thing about the space now is its shape. It's so lofty. You can imagine those giant pilasters rising from floor to ceiling, and the walls covered with that rich pine panelling. It must have looked superb. And it could look superb again. These wonderful scattered fragments could so easily be reassembled in their original home. Instead, the house remains barren and unloved. But in the case of Sutton Scarsdale, English Heritage, which now owns and maintains it, is adamant that it remain a ruin, even though it attracts few visitors and generates no income. It should be rebuilt. Just visualize the transformation. Over this bleak stonework would go this great panelled wall. Around this brick chimney would go this magnificent overmantel. And these windows, with their ornately moulded architraves, would look out onto the Derbyshire Dales as they were intended to. An accident of history wrenched historic rooms from the houses for which they were built. Now history has moved on, and we should put these wonderful interiors back in circulation. It's time to stop being sentimental about ruins. They might be romantic, they might be revealing, but more often they're just plain boring. A house without rooms makes no more sense than a room without a house. Keeping them apart is madness. It squeezes the life out of both of them.
I've been working at Pencarrow for nearly 37 years, and I think I've enjoyed all the time I've been here. I started off doing the laundry in the old servants' hall, and then when they opened Pencarrow to the public, I came up here and helped to clean that and get it ready for the opening. I work in the tea rooms now, thoroughly enjoy it in there. The front of the house is Georgian. It's very beautiful. You stand on the bank and look down with all the flowers, the rhododendrons and the camellias. We always sort of say, oh, our house or our place or something like that. I say it's been a part of my life for so many years. Part of my home, I suppose, in a way. I think I really love the house, because I've spent so many hours working in it. The house has got a lived-in feel about it now. Everyone, all the public say that. I think it must have been nice to have lived in the house when everything was all in full swing, and Sir Arthur Sullivan stayed here, and he was supposed to have written the music for my Iolanthe on the piano that's in the drawing room. We get a lovely lot of visitors here now.
Not too much.
I think our cream teas are about the best you can get in the country. They really are. And it seems to go down very well with the visitors.
Beautiful. There you are. Hold up.
Shockingly cast adrift by the electorate, former Cabinet Minister Michael Portillo at last has time to explore other passions. Now he finds inspiration in the ruthless genius of architect Sir John Soane.
I suppose most people, when they visit a fine country house, ask themselves whether they could actually imagine living there. Some houses are tremendous palaces, overbearing. But some houses just feel exactly right. The scale, the proportions. This is Wotton House in Buckinghamshire. You could just about imagine living here. You could fall in love with a house like this. And if you could free yourself from the daily grind of life, you could devote yourself to saving a house like this from destruction and restoring it. And if you made something out of a house like Wotton, that would be a pretty good monument to your time on Earth. This was once a house of powerful men. It was built in 1704 by Richard Grenville, and his descendants became the Dukes of Buckingham and Chandos. They mixed politics and architecture. They ruled the country, and they built the great estates. They employed the best. The original 18th century house here was of a design almost identical to Buckingham House, which later became Buckingham Palace. And here, the grounds were amongst the very first designed by Capability Brown. These pavilions, with their high roofs and cupolas, flanking the main building, are all that remain of the original building of 1704. In 1820, a fire destroyed the house. The owner, who himself had barely escaped the blaze, wrote urgently to an architect. The architect was the brilliant John Soane. John Soane did a remarkable thing. He made this house grander by making it smaller. Compared to the old building, he greatly reduced its height, took these first floor windows and shortened them, and here, at the attic level, tiny little windows squeezed in under the architrave, just under the roof line. And that gave the house new proportions, wider, dominated the landscape in a way that it hadn't done before. Pretty ruthless, you might say, not much regard for what was here before, but it worked brilliantly. And the result is a building that is serene and symmetrical and perfect, a real architectural achievement. And I love to just stand and admire it. But disaster befell the house again. By the 1950s, it was a ruin. Ceilings down, water pouring in. The demolition contractors were poised to knock it down. One lady stood in their way. She bought the house with her life savings and then devoted the rest of her life to restoring it. She had dared to imagine living here. She'd broken away from the conventions that bind us, and she'd made this house her life's work. Mrs. Brunner.
Hello.
Hello. It's lovely to see you again.
Hello, how nice.
You look wonderful.
Flatterer.
It's shocking feat. Let me take you back to the very beginning, if I may. When did you first become aware of the house?
I saw Wotton. I was trying to remember. I saw Wotton by accident. My husband was away skiing, and I loved to give him little surprises. I drove up with an antique dealer, and we arrived in front of the gates. And he said, well, this is Wotton that they've already started demolishing. And I said, oh, no, they're not. I said, I must save it.
Quite a surprise on his return.
Poor husband returned, and I said, I have bought the most beautiful house in England.
Despite the grandeur of this house, you do in fact live in it, don't you? This has been your home.
Of course.
And as I go around, I've found your garden fork in the hall, for
Yes,
example.
yes.
You've never felt it was too grand to live in?
No, I always felt that we belonged to one another. I've never had to be grand in it.
It's impossible to walk around the house without her descriptions of it ringing in your ears.
I love the whole vista of that fabulous staircase. Cantilevered, no weight at all. The little shallow risers, the curve, the way it curves. You see, I'm talking about the main staircase. And then this funny staircase here, which Corbusier adored. If you look at that staircase, there is nothing supporting it anywhere. And yet it goes up, floor after floor after floor. All right, it's a little secondary, unimportant staircase, but it has its own beauty.
Look at this. An Italian street scene, Mrs. Brunner calls it.
Well, yes, because you've got the funny little doors, which are as if they were going into apartments, so torpedo windows above, and the Romeo and Juliet balcony. And then look at that vista. Look at the vista through.
Perfect.
Look there.
Mrs. Brunner's vision and energy continues even today. Now it's the landscape which she's restoring, with the help of her loyal aide, Michael Harrison. Slowly and lovingly, he is rebuilding the temples and the bridges. A house and its park. What space and beauty and tranquility. Imagine the great thoughts you could have here, the poems you could write, the political plots that you could hatch, and the love affairs. Capability Brown planned the landscape so that it would constantly surprise. A meandering path leads you to a view of a temple, and then to another, and then to another. And the bridges, all different. Some lead you high over the water, and others lead you deep back into the woods again. Brown and Soane left these superb monuments to their time on Earth. And an elderly lady who saved their works from destruction made a wonderful mark on our world as well. Imagine being able to claim as much.
Well, it's wonderful having you here.
Well, thank you.
And
thank you very much for everything. Shall I
I can take her back. I'm sure I can.
Well, it would be my pleasure, nonetheless.
Goodbye, and lovely, lovely to have had you here. Really lovely. Look at this here, even here, this bit of detailing. How careful.
In next week's programme, Trouble in Torbay, the Battle of the Buffs. Will steam power win the day? Below the city streets, a great river is sucked into a subterraneous chamber pot. And Rain, Countess Spencer reveals a childhood encounter that led to a lifelong love affair. Until then, goodbye. For a free one-foot fact sheet with opening times, history and travel details of the places featured in this week's programme, please send a stamped addressed envelope to 1 Foot in the Past, P.O. Box 11341, London W12 6DD. And we're now online with